We are Dennis and Min. Come join us on our traveling adventures around the world. Hey everybody, welcome to the Higher Power Travel Channel. And International Living recently released their 2024 index for the top 10 countries to retire in. And many of these countries appear year after year, just in different rankings. And out of the 10 countries, Min and I have traveled to 6 out of the 10. We've spent time in 6 out of the 10 countries. So not that we're the experts by any means, but we do have some firsthand experience in looking at these different possibilities for places to retire. Before I get into these countries and our personal experiences with them, I will just say that I think we're seeing a surge in people, especially from the US, but in many other countries and even in Europe, of people that are considering international destinations to retire. And there's many reasons for that. And of course, it's a very personal choice. So I would just recommend for anybody that's considering this is to, first of all, do your research and go to these places with an open mind. And I do believe that you should listen to your gut. You know, there's just something about that. I'm a realtor. I see this with my clients and with myself, that sometimes you just get a feeling that, yeah, this is right. This could be great. This could be a nice change. So I think it's important to recognize when you have those feelings, that gut instinct that tells you, yeah, maybe you should pursue this, along with doing other research, of course, and looking at the numbers and all of that other stuff. So I will get right into these countries, the top 10 countries to retire. And again, note that these are not countries to visit, to go on vacation, but to actually retire, or in the case of a lot of people, semi-retire, or spend part of the year there and part of the year somewhere else. Number 1 is Costa Rica, and that has been a popular place for a long time. Number 2 is Portugal, and number 3 is Mexico. 4, Panama. Number 5 is Spain. Number 6 is Ecuador. Number 7, Greece. Number 8, Malaysia. Number 9, France. And number 10, Colombia. So starting with number 1, I will say that Min and I spent a few years ago about 5 weeks in Costa Rica, and we were looking at it as a serious possible future retirement location. So we had about 4 or 5 different locations spread out across the country where we were staying at Airbnbs. We rented a car for 5 weeks, and we would make these little day trips, in and around those hubs. And so we visited lots of cities and towns, large and small. And I will tell you, Costa Rica is absolutely gorgeous. It's very reminiscent of Hawaii, with the lush landscape and the rainforest and the wildlife and the waterfalls and the hiking and whitewater rafting, which we did. There's just a lot of fun things to do there. So they got great surfing if you're into water sports. And the people are friendly. The food is great. We had a really, really good time there. It just was not a place that we could call home in the future. A lot of people do. So again, it's a very personal choice. I will say one thing that turned us off, and I've noticed this in many areas of Mexico that we've traveled around to. There's a lot of people that in neighborhoods, nice neighborhoods, not so nice neighborhoods, they just have these walls built up around their properties. It gives me the impression that there's maybe a lot of petty crime and theft going on there. It happens all over where we are in Hawaii, so there's really no place that is immune from that kind of thing. In Hawaii, I had last year 2 catalytic converters stolen within 6 months of each other. So right after I got a new one put in there, a few months later, boom, it's gone again. So believe me, I know about crime and petty theft. So that thing is everywhere, but just driving around, I can't remember seeing a single person's door from the street because they have these, these walls built up all around their properties. So, and that's probably great. They're probably very safe in their home, but aesthetically, it just doesn't, it's not very pleasing to the eye when you see this, consistently throughout all these neighborhoods. Now, again, I'm sure there's many places where that doesn't exist, but we did see a lot of that, and it just kind of makes you feel like maybe this isn't such a safe place to be, because that's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't feel comfortable living in the U.S. anymore, unfortunately, is because crime and violence seems to be getting very worse, and statistics certainly back that up. So again, it wasn't a place for us, Costa Rica. It could be for you, and I think Costa Rica was probably like great 20 years ago. I remember a long time ago hearing about a lot of expats and people retiring to Costa Rica, but as so happens, over time, that inflates, the cost of living and prices. So things aren't as inexpensive as they used to be in Costa Rica. I mean, that's really the case everywhere. But for people that are thinking that they're going to get, a lot of things much less expensive than, say, in the U.S., it's just not the case in 2024. Second on the list, top 10 countries to retire, is Portugal. And we are very biased, Min and I, towards Portugal because we spent 5 weeks there on a scouting trip from the south of Portugal and the Algarve all the way to the north in Porto and everywhere in between. We scouted out about 35 towns, cities, and we'll be doing a separate video on that very soon on what we discovered. And Portugal really did exceed our expectations in so many ways. Again, I'm going to save a lot of the details for a separate video. And by the way, if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe so we can continue to keep in touch and share these informational videos with you from our experience. So number one with Portugal, out of those 10 countries, it was actually number one in healthcare, in the development, with the government stability, with climate. Out of all those 10 countries, it was the number one country out of the 10. So I think there's something to be said for that. But again, we had this tremendous feeling of comfort in being in Portugal to such an extent that it almost didn't feel like we were in a foreign country. So there's a lot of buzz about Portugal right now. Portugal, Portugal, Portugal. And a lot of people are interested and curious. And I can tell you, for us, it definitely lived up to the hype and the expectations. That's not going to be everybody's experience. We recognize that. But for us personally, we are very fond of Portugal. We've actually purchased property there as a result. Again, we'll get into more of that in a later video. Number 3 on the list was Mexico. We spent several weeks in Mexico over these last few years, and we love Mexico. And oh my gosh, I love Mexican food, especially. The people are warm and friendly. The cost of living, your money can definitely go further there. What's great about Mexico is if you're in the U.S., you're in such close proximity to get, to Mexico from most anywhere in the U.S. and Canada. So it has that going forward as well. Wonderful beaches, great climate. So Mexico, again, may be great for some people. For us, it was a little bit similar to Costa Rica, where, it just feels like people are a little bit on guard, having to be concerned about petty theft and some, having to secure, their homes in such a way. Again, I know that's not the case everywhere, but again, it just wasn't quite as attractive as a place like Portugal for us. Number 4, Panama. Have not been to Panama. Many people are considering retiring there. There's many expats already there. They've got a great visa program. And that's one thing when you're considering about relocating, retiring in another country, you've got to look at what the visa requirements are. And not all of them are the same. And some are going to be easier to obtain than others. For us, Portugal was a good match for that. But Panama is very welcoming to expats and retirees. And provide even further incentives to retirees to be moving there. They can get additional discounts on so many services and public transportation, entertainment, theaters, movies. They just provide so many incentives for expats and foreigners that are relocating there. Number 5 is Spain. We spent a little bit of time in Spain over these last couple years, maybe a total of a week and a half. So not a lot. I actually lived in Spain for a month many years ago studying Spanish. And Spain is a wonderful country, great culture, great history. So in the time that we were there, it just, again, it's not, for us, it wasn't a bad place to consider. But again, compared to Portugal, Portugal just rose above so much for us. Number 6, Ecuador. I have some close friends that spent about 6 months in Ecuador. They were considering retiring there several years back. And I think like some of the things I've already mentioned, they had a great time. It was a wonderful experience. It just wasn't a place they could call home for a long period of time in their retirement. Right now, as of late, there's quite some instability and unrest in the country. I think at some point I would like to go to Ecuador, but I don't, have this desire to want to consider living there as a retiree. But keep in mind, everything's in perspective. I looked at the online, and Ecuador is actually similar in terms of crimes and violence is very similar to the United States. So people are thinking like, oh, don't go to Ecuador, don't go to Quito. Quito, the city of Quito is actually safer than Chicago. That's probably not too surprising. But yeah, the U.S. is a very big country, so we have to keep that in perspective. And city life is different from the rural areas, of course, when it comes to violence and crime. But you have to keep everything in perspective that Ecuador is actually comparable to the U.S. when it comes to safety, believe it or not. Number 7, Greece. Woo! Greece, we spent a few weeks there as well over these past couple years. Wonderful people, great food. They've got so much of everything. Great beaches and forest, and weather is great pretty much year round. And, with the islands, it's just so scenic there. And again, we just weren't feeling it as far as a place to retire. Again, their visa process is a little bit different than a country like Portugal, so something to look into. But we had a great time there. Again, just wasn't a place that we wanted to consider as a future retirement place. Number 8, Malaysia. We had heard a lot about Malaysia. We have some close friends that are from there. We spent 5 weeks in Malaysia, and similarly to Costa Rica, we had stayed in about 4 different Airbnbs throughout the country. We stayed in Penang, we went to Langkawi, we went to Kuala Lumpur, and there was Cameron Highlands, which is kind of up in the mountains. It's a lot cooler. We loved Malaysia, and Min, of course, is Chinese, so there's a lot of Chinese people there. But the cool thing about Malaysia is that everybody speaks English for the most part. It's an English-speaking country, which kind of blows people's minds away, but they are wonderful people. It is predominantly a Muslim country, so throughout the day you hear through these loudspeakers wherever you are, some guy is chanting these prayers for all to hear. And to me, it's like, wow, what if we did that in our country? Like, that would be kind of a cool thing. But, where people actually collectively stop and they stop whatever they're doing and they take a moment for God. Like, that's just such a cool thing. So very different from life in the U.S. Malaysia is known for their wonderful food. In fact, Penang is just one of the top foodie places in the world. But because it's a Muslim country, if you like your drink, alcohol is very expensive there. When I say it's much more expensive than what you're paying for everything else, it is comparable to what you would be paying, in my opinion, in the U.S. for beer, for a bottle of wine, for a shot of whiskey. It's comparable. So don't think that those things are going to be a great bargain, because they will not be in Malaysia. But everything else pretty much is going to be much less. Even to me, I think even more affordable than in Portugal. And the food is just fantastic there. The one big turnoff for us with Malaysia is the weather. Year round, it is hot and muggy, humid. It's fairly close to the equator, and that's why we went to Cameron Highlands, because it is higher up in elevation, so it's cooler there year round. Even with that nicer weather, it just wasn't a place that we really felt that we could consider to retire. You know, they've got really one road in and out, and because it's in the mountains, they have frequent landslides, and then you might be kind of stuck for a while or having to go an alternate route that's really going to take you out of the way to where you're going. So they do have, even in this small town of Cameron Highlands, they've got their share of traffic, because it really is just one road in, one road out on either side, and it can get very congested, especially in the high seasons there. But again, overall, they've got wonderful infrastructure. The roads are beautiful, incredible shopping malls. I don't like shopping at all. I'm a guy, and I could spend hours in these shopping malls. They are just magnificent, beautiful. I won't say quite as like the same as going into a cathedral in Europe, but pretty darn close. I mean, it's like, wow, what they've done with these shopping malls. It's incredible. And they're all air conditioned, so it makes it even nicer. But yeah, there's so much great things about Malaysia I could go on and on about. We will definitely be going back to Malaysia to visit. Not quite a place that we would want to retire because of the weather situation. Again, our opinion. Moving on to next, number 9, France. We actually haven't spent a lot of time in France, but we do have some friends that we've made in Portugal that are staying in Portugal throughout the year. There's reasons for that. Number one is primarily because of the weather's a little bit warmer and nicer year-round in Portugal than in France. And I think you have to look at the areas of France, because I think certain areas, certainly in and around Paris, are going to be quite pricey. But there are more rural areas that you can be living more on a budget for sure. And I think my little understanding of France, I think it's a lot like Portugal, where as you get out of the cities, people don't speak as much English. And so that could be a little bit of a barrier, especially if you're looking to retire in a rural area. Just note that there may not be as much English speaking. So again, if you're planning on living there, it's good to assimilate and try to learn as much of the language as you can. Okay, so that takes us to number 10, Colombia. We've never been to Colombia, but I can tell you from what I've read and learned and talked to people that have visited there recently, it is not the Colombia that you've heard about 10, 15 years ago. It is a safe country to go to, and a lot of good things going forward, great health care and so on. So I'm going to be posting the link to the index here, and so that way you can look at in more detail how these countries compare to one another. But for us, Portugal stood out among the top 10, and we discovered that about a year and a half ago, and we've been very happy living part-time in Portugal. So I hope you've enjoyed this segment of covering International Living's top 10 countries to retire. And if you have any comments, please share with us, and maybe other places that you've been, maybe where you already are retired. Share those with us in the comments so we can hear about your story and your experience there. Until next time, again, make sure to subscribe and like. We'll see you again. Aloha.